Jesus walks on water. Immediately, he made the disciples get into a boat and go on ahead to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he dismissed the crowds, he went up the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but by this time the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning, he came walking toward them on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It is a ghost!" And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and started walking on the water and came toward Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." Pretty iconic moments, the
Mm.
feeding the 5,000 and the walking on the water. That's like if anybody who like doesn't know anything about like Christianity or Jesus or whatever, that's apart from the resurrection, probably the walking on water is the thing that people know.
Yeah, so well, it's an interesting question. Why is that? Because there's a lot of miracles to choose from and a lot of interesting parts, but these two are the probably the most striking in scale, uh,
Mm.
maybe, and
They're also in a lot of the Gospels as well. So I think it's in Mark as well. I think Luke. So it's one of the kind of stories that is kind of most read just out of just reading the Bible, if you know what I
Yeah.
mean, because it just keeps coming up. But yeah, it's definitely one of the most kind of iconic miracles, especially if you went to church as a kid, like you did. You always like Jesus feed the 5,000 or the 4,000. You know, you'd have some loaves or something.
I love the like Simon or Peter, I guess. Um, I love that he says, "If it's you, then command me to come out to you on this water
Yeah.
yeah,
and walk."
I wanted to make a point on that as well, but I'll let you you
No,
do it first.
I mean, I was just gonna say, I think it's one. I love that um, even even one of Jesus' disciples
Mm.
begins to doubt a little bit, and
Oh yeah.
that's when he's drowning.
Mm.
Um, so it's like if it almost normalizes some doubt that we like ordinary people may have
Mm.
if even one of his disciples
Mm.
um Simon or Peter, which he was named Peter because he's the rock
Yeah.
on so again he's like the rock steady um but then uh and Jesus is interesting because he doesn't stop him from sinking.
Mm.
He lets him sink a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
He lets him fall, and then he
Pulls them
saves
up.
him.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't know, Philip, you have something to say about this? I just love it.
Mm.
Yeah. I thought this passage was quite interesting. Well, before that, what I did find interesting is when he hears about the death of John, he goes into solitude,
Mm.
and I think he wanted to go to pray
Mm.
because later he does the same
Yeah.
thing, but he gets
Yeah.
interrupted,
Mm.
right? And then he performs the miracle, and then he goes
Mm.
to pray, which I'm assuming is what he wanted to do in the first place. So that's interesting as well because for him that would be signifying what I mentioned before, that his
Mm.
time is sort of coming,
Mm.
right? Because the person who showed his coming into the world is now dead, which means
Yeah.
that his
Yeah.
predestination is coming catching up to him,
Yeah.
and the idea is that whilst in his human state, right,
Mm.
Jesus's powers are limited, so
Yeah.
the knowledge isn't
Mm.
all there.
Mm.
But he assumingly we already know at this point because in a couple of chapters he starts talking about what's going to happen to him.
Mm.
He knows his sort of destiny, right? And he's
Mm.
sort of following John and
Mm.
seeing where John is sort of around, and that's relative to where he's around.
Mm.
Right? So I thought that's interesting that he goes and talks with destiny, right? With God,
Yeah.
to see about where things are going to go.
Yeah.
And then this is just very interesting here because Peter here does what the Pharisees did, right? If that's really you,
Yeah. he
do a
put the
miracle,
test. Yeah.
right? Help me walk on the water. But but here it's different. He doesn't tell him go away.
Mm.
He tell him it's okay because he's actually open to
Yeah.
it, right? So that he actually trusts him.
Mm.
And then we see that he doesn't trust him quite enough with his life to the point where he does start falling. But that's why I think faith is this idea of trust primarily. Because here it's not about proving that he can walk on water. We're seeing him walk on water.
Mm.
That's not the point, right? The point is, do you trust in him enough to actually put your feet on the water?
Yeah. I was just gonna say also, sorry.
No, you go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, also, the fact that Jesus lets him fall a little bit and drown, I think is an important point, because I think a lot of times people have this conception that, like, just that Christians think that God is just gonna make everything, perfect for us all the time, and that everything we want is just gonna come true.
Mm-hmm.
But in this, you see Jesus lets him fall a little bit,
Mm.
and lets him recognize through his fall,
Mm.
the power of his faith and trust
Yeah.
in him, and the dangers that come
Mm.
from losing
Yeah.
that trust, which I think is a really important message for people, that God will let you fall a little bit, but that's only to strengthen
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
faith ultimately.
Because he rebukes Jesus straight up. Sorry, Jesus rebukes Peter straight afterwards and says, why do you have so little faith?
Yeah.
And that must have hit home for him as well. And I recently heard like a talk on this passage, and that's really the only place to be if you want to survive in this situation, is off the boat, walking on water, because they're being troubled by waves, and so that boat was probably going to sink. And the only way to survive was for Peter, in this case, to walk out in faith upon the water towards Jesus. And so kind of you could probably look at that almost as an image of the Christian life, that we have to trust Christ and walk out in faith. Because if we stay in the boat, and rely on things that are literally material to stay afloat, we end up drowning. Just an interesting little side fact I learned recently. I believe this is probably the Sea of Galilee, and if you saw a ghost at that time of night or day or morning, apparently it meant you were going to die. So obviously they thought it was a signal that they were going to
Really?
die. Seeing like a
Instead, it was a
ghost on
signal that
Galilee.
we have eternal life.
Yeah, yeah. And so
Right.
immediately they thought, oh, my days, we're going to die. And obviously had no faith because they completely panicked. And so, which was kind of an interesting thing I recently was told. And so, again, like they thought they were going to die, and the only way for them to survive in this case, obviously Jesus comes onto the boat, was to, again, walk out in faith. But I agree, yeah. Jesus will pull us up if we are, in our walking a wrong direction, but ultimately he will. But we do make mistakes, and he does rebuke us, and that is a sign that we are his children. A good parent does that, sometimes.
Right, they're helping you whilst they're rebuking you.
Yeah, I
Right.
remember once my parents gave me, they let me eat a whole spoonful of mustard, and I ate it, and I was like, oh my days, I'm never doing that again. I might have done that before, but stuff like that, where we might, even though that's not terrible, our parents sometimes let us not go off the road, but definitely show us the consequences of our actions and then rebuke us accordingly.
I don't know why this image just came into my head, but I have, like, the image, the thing, like, you learn to swim by, throwing the like,
Yeah,
you just you gotta
essentially just
save yourself.
drowning
Right,
little bits
exactly.
at a time. Yeah,
I have this, like, I don't know, this image of, like, okay, you have, like, a young kid, and you have two parents standing, and the dad is like, yeah, just throw him in the pool and he'll
yeah,
learn to swim that way. The mom's really worse. Throw him into the pool, and the kid, like,
hold
starts
them.
really
Yeah,
struggling, and the mom's like, let's go get him. And the dad, like, it's like, just wait,
see,
wait a
that's it.
little
Yeah,
bit. And
Yeah.
mm,
then, yeah, and the kid, like, suddenly realizes how to
control themselves,
Code
stuff like
himself and
yeah.
swim. Yeah, there's a lot of instances like that. Like, when you learn to ride a bike, you're gonna crash
Yeah.
and skin your
Yeah.
knee and
Yeah.
got all kinds of injuries before you can become
Mm.
good. And it's like that with everything, right? We
Mm.
don't just like learn things and master things just like with the snap of our fingers
No.
instantly. We
No.
have to go through trials and
Yeah.
tribulations
Mm.
before we
Yeah.
come to learn things, and that kind of continues with like each stage we try to
Mm.
go up and get better at things. We have to go through trials and
Yeah.
tribulations. We
Mm.
have to die before we resurrected.
Exactly.
I don't know if this is a bit of a stretch, but the wind
Mm-hmm.
in the story, when I first read the line about the boat was already a considerable distance from land,
Mm.
buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. I don't know why this happened, but I thought of the wind as as the world against the disciples who are on their little boat, right?
Mm.
Maybe it's the precursor because I was thinking about John's death that
Mm.
just happened, and Jesus is meditating on that, right? So yeah, I just thought of that, and then later I noticed that when Peter, the reason his faith is shaken is the
Yeah,
wind,
it's
right?
not the
He
waves.
sees the wind,
Mm.
right? Oh, he sees the wind. He feels the wind.
No.
So, and that's interesting because later on, it is the world that shakes his faith the most,
Mm.
right? It's the consequences of
Yeah.
following Jesus. That's what's gonna make him start to fall in the
Yeah.
water. So, I mean, this must be some sort of a stretch that I'm making, but it's just interesting that happened because when I just heard this, maybe because it's an analogy that's often used about the wind being sort of the life, against your sails, and you're
Mhm.
trying to go against the wind
Mm.
kind of thing. You're trying to go against tradition, which is the Pharisees, which is this embedded thing that Jesus is supposedly going up against. And we see that Peter, that is what he's most afraid of. He's afraid of going up against the wind.
Mm.
Right? And later, that's what happens when he says that he isn't a follower of Jesus because they question him, right? He doesn't want to take any consequences for that.
With I also think there's some parallels to Jonah here.
Mm.
Or wait, Jonah, he how does he get trapped in the whale? Is he on a boat and the
There's
boat
a
gets
storm, I believe.
the storm gets like
Nick says, like, what's going on? It's like, well, kind of been running from God. And they're like, all right, we got, and then he jumps into the water.
right.
And I think the storm settles and he gets swallowed by a giant fish.
Uh,
But there's that storm that I think urges him off because he goes in the complete opposite direction to Nineveh. He goes I think it goes into the sea or onto a lake or something. He just gets away.
right.
And yeah, it's a storm that forces. I believe it's a storm that forces him off the boat. Double check.
And then I was also thinking about like Noah and the flood.
Mm-hmm.
Um and the idea like of completely washing everything away and destroying everything, and Jesus is because Jesus is there, he's able to calm everything down, and there's the that's not necessary because Jesus is there to uh save people himself.
Well, water represents maybe the best representation of nature as a whole that we
Yeah,
have,
nature and chaos.
because it continually changes.
Mhm.
It gives you life, so it nourishes you, but it also has this
Kill, yeah.
completely destructive quality, which we see in the Bible, and it's actually God who most of the time is doing the destructive qualities with the. But then in the gospel there is the Jesus calming the storm, right?
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah,
Like
maybe
he's
there's something there.
like in the Noah, like the storm doesn't stop. It comes and it
Mm.
hmm
destroys everything except the ark. Um where maybe, Jesus is the ark, right? He is, you know,
Or a flimsy boat in the Galilean Sea, but
no,
but
but
yeah.
what I mean is he does like the ark saves the people in
Mhm.
it, prevents them from the storm, the same way that Jesus is protecting people from the storm and the effects of it, both literally in this passage, but also
Mhm.
metaphorically speaking. He's saving people from the storm of sin or the storm of evil.
Mm.
Right, because Noah, all he can do is save himself
saves,
and,
yeah.
and whoever he can get, but Jesus can actually go up against the storm, right?
Right. In Noah, it's the ark. With Jesus, it's himself.
Yeah, and he
Right.
saves, and like the reason there is the flood is because of God's judgment, and he saves people from God's judgment as well, I guess. So it's like, you know, the ark happened because, the flood happened because the world was so evil and sinful. God was like, oh, flip, I've got to restart. But Noah was there, and he was at least back then a decent bloke. And so Christ is, it could be kind of looked in that similar way of saving those from the judgment of God.
But
Yeah.
there's also this idea that for like the way you say God's judgment, but when God is present, there's this idea in Christianity, at least from like Augustine, where what is evil, for example? Evil is a privation of the goodness, it's the privation of God. And here I'm seeing the same, like, why does everything go into chaos? It's when God removes himself, right? So it's not like he's actively trying to do something bad. It's more like he says, these people are so wretched that I'm going to remove myself from them. And then everything goes into chaos. And Noah is the only one who has enough faith to save whoever he can. And now with Jesus coming, now we see that he is sort of the new thing that you base your faith on. And when the storm starts to pick up, when the wind starts coming from Peter, he gets afraid that God is leaving him, right? That order is leaving him.
Yeah.
But then Jesus is like, I'm right here, right? So he pulls him up because he's open to it.